This has been a year unlike any other. We were already expecting an intense media year because of the election, but 2020 said, hold my drink, and threw in a pandemic, protests, hurricanes, wildfires, murder hornets, and worst of all, we had to go 67 days without any sports. And what did that leave us with? Media, lots of it. From the minute you wake up to the minute you close your eyes, you're bombarded with news. It's overwhelming and it gets complicated. It's like being in a relationship, and sometimes in order to keep your sanity, you just gotta say, I need a break. But before we can start to understand our relationship with media, we have to learn how to speak its language.
The thing I love about media literacy is that it doesn't matter what you believe in, what you care about, what you value, it touches on everything. Like, the media impacts everything. And so whether you are a diehard liberal or you're conservative, like, media is impacting you. And you need to know how you are being impacted, the power it has over, we have to be empowered as opposed to having the media have the power over us. And that's no matter how old you are, no matter what you believe in, no matter what your sexuality or gender is, no matter what your political beliefs are, media is like the one common ground.
I think that at the heart of it is understanding how media work, how the news works, participating, not just consuming, and being an active user of media.
How are we affected by our constant interaction with media?
We're in sort of this kind of chaotic sea of information and misinformation and lots of holding on to old school power. And I see so many of the established news organizations hunkering down on old practices rather than embracing a different kind of listening, a different kind of storytelling, a different kind of opening their newsroom to a variety of voices.
Anytime you pull out your phone, anytime you walk by and you have the TV on, anytime you have the radio on, you're kind of deluged with information. I think that there's an information glut. There's just so much information out there in the world today. So I think that feeling of the world is moving so fast because there's always news, there's always information, it's just pushed at us constantly, makes people really feel like they can't possibly keep up. And if the news isn't great, and a lot of times it isn't, is where you get at, I think the new word is doom scrolling.
People just going down this, everything's horrible social media thing.
And it also incentivizes like putting the spiciest details at maybe the top of the story and leaving the context for later on, even though we know people are going to click out the further down that they scroll. I think when you have that type of system that's built around those incentives, those dopamine hits, it's sort of like an addiction.
I think everybody should take a regular break from media.
I mean, I will talk over and over again to middle schoolers and high schoolers, and what will they say to me? They say they're nervous about the impact that social media is having on them, the impact it has on their self-image. They are frustrated by how bad they can feel about themselves when being on social media.
I think before the pandemic, it was this trap that a lot of us were falling into of like feeling this pressure to put content out that shows everything's great and, look at this cool thing and I'm on this plane and we're traveling to this place and like everybody did it, where it was just like overload of all these things where people are presenting their best foot forward constantly. And so I think we were falling into this trap of like, oh, I thought I was doing okay, but that person seems to be doing better. And what am I doing wrong? And it's a lot of pressure. And I think it's a hard thing. At least I'm of a certain age where I have grown a thicker skin. I'm not insecure. If I was a young person, I would be like, oh my gosh. I mean, I can't even imagine having had to deal with this a long time ago.
Most people tend to take things to their extreme. Like if they're online, they're going to be online a lot. You know, if they're on their phone, they're going to be on their phone a lot. So I tell people, as far as like keeping up with information, that most people would be better off just like with a once a week check-in, you know, like kind of like a recap almost at the end of the week, you know?
Speaking of checking in, it's time for a pop quiz. We've all heard the term used in wildly different ways. So, we asked some PBS fans, how do you define fake news?
I define fake news as a bit of information being presented as fact without any real facts to back up its claim.
This is for more like an internal feeling where I'm just like, I don't know, like that. This is like in line with like I want to think is true, but I need to dig a little bit deeper. So that's more of like, it's like a gut feeling that it seems like, I mean, obviously, like I'm in an echo chamber with most of my social media. Like I follow people who are more so in line with my views, but I don't know if I definitely have like it's more of a moral compass that guides me with fake news, but I feel like that could be a slippery slope too.
Fake news, I think, is something that is maybe a major jump to conclusion to try to sway someone's opinion a certain way, or a major exaggeration on a slight truth. And also to try to sway somebody's opinions or thoughts and beliefs a certain way.
To me, fake news is anything that you can really look at and go, on the face of it, this just doesn't make sense.
How do we fit active media consumption into our lives?
I need to go to the news. I don't want news to come to me. I don't need to know everything that happens the moment it happens. It's not a healthy way to live. And I am a big believer in the fact that more information is not better information, and that your goal is not to continuously consume, but your goal is to find quality information and focus on that.
And one way we can help not be pushed into things is to understand, again, how media operate and how certain people use it in ways that are quite problematic. So we have to help people understand that the best way to move forward as communities is to work from the best set of facts that we can, from reality-based conditions, and then we may not like the reality, but we can at least, if we understand it, we can move forward.
You can have the news on in the background all day, and you might know less than what I learn on a 30-minute podcast in the morning, because, you know, just the news cycle is so stretched out and so constructed that, you know, you're just hearing the same things over and over again. So I always recommend a very deliberate relationship with media and a very deliberate relationship with the news, especially.
How can we protect ourselves from fake news and misinformation?
And we have to understand that there are mistakes made by good people, but that's not in the same category as deliberate lies from bad people. Both fall under the misinformation umbrella, but they're not the same thing. And we need to know the difference.
just simply asking who made this, like where did this information come from? And you asked that before you shared anything. And if you couldn't figure it out, you didn't share it, that would change a lot. It's always be asking questions, wondering, being curious. Like a media literate society is one in which people always have their eyes wide open.
So it's really just being absolutely scrupulous about like checking the source and then going to see, is anyone else covering this particularly outrageous story? And if the answer is no, probably it was a, kind of a clickbait or a rage bait type activity as opposed to something that people really need to, be paying attention to right now.
All right, so here it is, the moment you've all been waiting for. It's time to address the elephant and the donkey in the room. How do we navigate an election year online?
In some ways, there's some really positive stuff, right? Like new candidates can get discovered. Relatively small, unknown person, instead of needing a huge budget and war chest, can grow a social media following, reach people, and speak to them, right? And I think that that's been really transformative as far as like enabling more people to get into politics, particularly in the US where, it's so expensive.
I do think this online information warfare does have an effect on our political outcomes. The effect is less so, let's say, on like literal elections, more so on like the long-term effect of how people are susceptible to propaganda and information.
I mean, I think we have a situation right now where you have some news outlets where they'll run a news program that is, fact-based, somewhat objective, and then right next to it, they'll run a program that is mainly centered around punditry and opinions and sort of, skewing the facts in a way to fit a certain perspective. I mean, I feel like that's just such a novel, unique form of propaganda, and it's something that as a society we really haven't had to grapple with.
I think one of the challenges that we have with the way that information spreads online today is it really kind of lends itself to like meme policies, policies where somebody says a word or a phrase or comes up with a cute acronym. The acronym goes viral. Nobody reads the substance of the policy. One of the challenges with the internet is so much attention goes to following the things that are thin and focused on the scandal that you wind up with a very sensationalism-driven politics in which, ironically, like the Twitter conversation kind of sets the agenda for what the mainstream media covers as well a lot of the time, unfortunately. This is trending on Twitter. We have to get a take on that. We have to write an article about it. And so these things that start off as kind of internet, pseudo events or just spectacle become like the more substantive coverage as well.
I guess what I like to say is that lies spread faster than the truth, right? Like it's an upsetting rule of the internet, but it's one that I think some internet purveyors are capitalizing on, right?
As more time goes on, that's going to be the lasting impact. Is just the fact that these massive companies and these like infiltrating trolls and even just people like you or me that are just like influencing maybe like a handful of people out there. All of that is having more of an effect on like broader patterns in like how we consume information.
We all know how heated things can get online. People behave in ways they never would in real life. We asked viewers like you if they've ever had to hit that unfriend or unfollow button.
No, because I want people to know and think and see what I'm posting. When the political uprising started in America, I was like, I'm getting back on Facebook. Everyone was like, get off of Facebook. I was like, screw that. I'm getting back on because that's where everyone needs help.
It's funny how it's become the like line in the sand these days. If someone's unfriended or unfollowed, you're like, whoa, okay, I guess we're in a fight. When it's so like trivial. There's been some friends of mine who have like on Instagram, you're like, oh, they don't follow me anymore. What did I do? Did I post too much? But sometimes it's not a you thing, it's a them thing, and they're dealing with something, or they don't like seeing something, or they're not satisfied with something in their own life. And so I don't take it as personal anymore.
There was one guy in particular that I played music with when I was in middle school. He was a good friend, and he's just gotten very trollish as an adult.
Trolls have been around forever. But who's got the biggest trolls? China, Russia, or that 13-year-old kid down the street?
The stuff we've seen from China hasn't been, it's designed to paint China in the best possible light and to denigrate groups that China has decided need to be denigrated. So Hong Kong protesters are a common one. It's repeatedly saying how bad the protesters are, and then by contrast, how good China is. So it doesn't have the same degree of engagement. And because it always kind of points back to China, the Russian stuff doesn't point back to Russia most of the time. Most of the Russian state-sponsored troll campaigns speak only to the targeted audience in using memes and cultural references that the targeted audience will understand, even if everybody else doesn't. It's very much about finding a group, signaling to that group, giving that group content that that group is going to find funny and continue to share on. So it's much better at understanding the psychology and the dynamics that make people respond. If you're going to be a successful troll, you're doing it because you really understand the psychology of the person you're targeting. It's when you start to do it in a way that gets at that thing they care about. That's what makes, trolling good, so to speak.
When you've been betrayed in a relationship, it's hard to trust again. How does propaganda affect our relationship with the news?
A lot of ways in which real past grievances done to communities and done to individuals in the past. So people who are disinclined to trust health authorities because of these kinds of moments in the past are, it's a very real reaction, very understandable reaction.
The World Health Organization is going to make mistakes, just like anyone is going to make mistakes. But I think we have to remember that the WHO is the OG, right? Like they're old school, like they beat smallpox, right? They brought measles down in most places around the world, right? This is such a huge, important organization. And I think it's okay to be critical of those organizations, but also to remember that they are putting out, evidence-based information that can really help people.
And when there's a lack of trust in the institutions, when there's a lack of trust in what the government is going to tell you or what the health institutions are going to tell you, then people are more receptive to seeing that content from their friend on Facebook, even if their friend on Facebook is not a doctor, not a medical researcher, and has no idea worth speaking of. With COVID-19, we saw this in a huge range of communities. People who were more likely to trust the president really believed that hydroxychloroquine was a cure-all that the liberals or Fauci or some other boogeyman was keeping from them. And there was a vast conspiracy to keep the country closed so that they couldn't work, which was going to disproportionately harm certain types of rural communities.
The most important thing when it comes to trust is not actually, me as a non-epidemiologist, I'm going to look at your presentation of the facts and say, well, I disagree. That makes no sense, right? Fauci has his opinion, I have my opinion. That makes zero sense.
Whose job is it to teach media literacy?
In terms of education, we also have to think of this communication systems, the media landscape, being something that is discussed at the very youngest of ages through your life.
So having conversations with my kids, with colleagues, that is really important to have conversations with the same community. If we don't talk to our kids, those new generations, somebody else is going to talk to them. And I'd rather be the one to facilitate those tough conversations sometimes than a stranger.
My husband is white. My husband grew up affluent, but we have worked really hard since the very beginning of acknowledging the differences that we have. And that has made it so that we can talk about really uncomfortable stuff where we definitely disagree. That has to be okay. Like, even if we're reading the same information, we might come away with something completely different at the end. And I think that's where we differ a little bit. And it's based on this kind of hill of trust we've built, that it's okay if we don't come to the same conclusion at the end. I'm not going to try to convince him, and he's not going to try to convince me. But we have the same source material.
Media is everywhere. It's impacting everything we do, everything we think, every value we have. It is all encompassing, and we need to be able to recognize that there's no more important skills than teaching students how to navigate this, and just remembering that you're always going to be a student of this. You're never going to graduate. Like, you are always going to need to understand technology and how it changes.
How do influencers impact our culture?
There's a lot of meta battles about whether something was appropriate to say, or how it was said, or who was offended by it, or who's not offended by it, who was harmed. These sorts of framings that have kind of gotten more prevalent. Less discussion about the actual substance of the comment, maybe, or the underlying narrative.
Part of what's going on with media and comedy and all of this is that people don't feel like they have a lot of control over what their government is doing right now. But people with their buying habits, people with their watching habits, feel like they have more control over the media. And so what you are seeing is people perhaps put more energy into that at times than in other places, because it is one area where they have a feeling of control. But they feel like maybe they could guarantee, or maybe they could move towards having people in the media be more representative of their interests and have their interests at heart.
With so much at stake, who needs protection? Journalists or journalism?
Both. The institution of journalism as a whole, which has been under threat for a long time.
That's the wrong question. The correct question, with great respect, is what is journalism?
Because if we protect the person, it will protect the art of journalists, because it is an art. We as journalists, or the schools of journalists, have forgotten this. We are humans too. And we do need to protect ourselves, our emotional and mental health, our physical health as well. So I think we need to protect the journalists, obviously. That's the first thing. That's a human being that we need to take care of.
We've covered a lot. Where do we go from here?
I think reporters have to start linking to the reporting of the smaller journalists that they get the stories from. It's important because as people reading one publication start to build an awareness of other trustworthy publications. That's how a network of trust works.
We all decide the future of news. You do, I do. Anyone listening to this will be part of that decision and part of what happens. If enough of us want stuff that has quality and based on reality that informs us about things we need to understand, then over time we can make sure it happens.
Humans are the most important factor, key element of our story. So we should never forget that behind one number, behind all the data, there is a family, there is a kid, there is a man or woman.
I have actually an incredible amount of hope about the future, believe it or not. And that has to do with the way youth maneuver the communication systems that they are growing up in. I think that they are naturally asking questions.
If you're going to be immersed in media, make sure that part of your immersion is things that are not going to make you even more depressed than you already are.
I wonder if people are going to come through this fog that they're in terms of misinformation, and realize, okay, I need to change the way that I think. Like, I've been misled. I've been distracted by these misconceptions.
We need to cut ourselves more slack. We need to cut our children more slack. We need to just be a little bit more forgiving. There is no way as a human being that we can keep up. So my tip that I just always say, especially to parents or for older people, is just always be asking questions. Be skeptical. Wonder, what's missing from this story that I would be helpful to know.
But the fundamental thing that makes journalism trustworthy are the set of norms, social processes, incentives, sanctions, all these things together that hopefully move people towards the truth. It's the same thing in science.
No matter what you do, someone's going to agree with you, someone's going to not agree with you. You can't win. So I'm just trying to do the best I can as someone who's, somewhat in the public eye. Like, I just am trying to be a good person. I'm trying to lead by example. That's what I'm trying to do.
A media literate society is one in which people always have their eyes wide open, right? They're always wondering, and they're always curious, and they're always thinking about other people's perspectives and, how different people would take information differently, and why certain stories are being told and why they're not. And we're just always asking questions.
The greatest power that media consumers have is the off switch.